I'm here with my close friend and colleague, Dr. Dharmesh Mehta from Mumbai, India. Such an honor to have you here, sir. Namaste.
Namaste. Thank you.
We are here to complete our series on all of the planets in all of the houses and all of the signs from many different perspectives. And today we are focusing on Shani Deva. And we will focus on Shani Deva's position in all of the 12 Bhavas, in all of the 12 houses, and we will also touch on Shani and the various signs. I'm looking very forward to this today. And how are you doing today, sir?
Yeah, better. And after Vakrigra, now it's a Saturn. And definitely Saturn always keep attention of the whole world. And it's a right time as it is being in the sign of Dharma. We should give the right direction to the people who are benefit of a Saturn and who are not so getting benefit. See, Saturn never gives the negative result. Why the people has that tendency? See, it is on your own karma only. And when the karma gives a result, you just deny that you have not done that. So that is means you know the reality, but you are denying the fruit of that deeds you have done. So that is why people scare about the Saturn, but not Saturn, the judgment day. The Saturn is nothing but the judgment. So that is why it is a very beautiful arrangement you have done about the Saturn, and definitely that will be an eye opener as earlier videos whatever we have done. So that will be really helpful. So that's good.
Thank you, Dr. Dharmesh. I also wanted to mention two general things that I like to share about Saturn is that one of the great names of Saturn is Shani, and that means the slow-moving planet. And of all of the major planets, Saturn is the one which is the farthest away from the sun, and it's the planet which moves the slowest. So let's remember that Saturn is Shani. And then also Saturn is Mahakala. That means the great time. So that means Saturn is the lord or the controller of the time. And so we also must remember this power that Saturn has over time. And I would like to start our session with Ganesha mantra. And then we will start with Saturn in first house and Saturn in Aries.
Yeah.
Om Gananam Tva Ganapatim Havamahe Kavim Kavinam Upamastravastamam Jaistarajam Brahmanam Brahmanaspatana Shrinmanu Tivihi Siddha Sadhanam Vakratanda Mahakaya Surya Koti Samaprabha Nirvignam Kurume Deva Sarvakayeshu Sarvada Siddhi Buddhi Shakti Sahita Sriman Mahaganati Pataye Namo Namaha Nirvignam Kuru. Om Nilanjana Samabhasham Ravi Putram Yamagrajam Chayamartanda Sambutam Tam Namami Shanaishcharayam Nilajana Samabhasham Ravi Putram Yamagrajam Chayamartanda Sambutam Tam Namami Shanaishcharayam. Om Pram Prim Pram Saha Shanaishcharaya Namaha. 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 Hari Om Om Namah Shivaya. Namaste, Dr. Dharmesh, and all of our viewers. And because something about Shani is about honoring our teachers and our elders, I would like you to start with Shani in the first house, sir.
Thank you very much, Kṣaṇāti. And I believe that our both Saturn is so strong, so bonding is for lifelong. So the normally the Saturn, whenever it comes to the first house, we'll talk Aries afterward, but basically in the first house when the Saturn is there, so that the position where your soul has started. The first house is nothing but your body arrived, you got the body, and inside the body you are filled with the soul. So here there is a clash, or we can say here there is a conflict between the soul and the deeds. Because Saturn seated being outside, and we all know the Karaka, the significator of first house is a sun. So sun inside and Saturn outside. Here Saturn doesn't allow sun to come out. So whatever the his heart says, his soul says, but nothing will be lies. Only the karma will prevail. So that the sunny Saturn being in the first house, they all come under the equation of learn with own experience. They don't get any support from others, and they have to rise within. They don't follow anybody's, and they start whatever they start with their own experience. Yeah, lot of stress will be there, lot of hardship will be there, but one day they succeeded. By sitting the first house, it will directly affect the seventh house. Being it's directly affected the seventh house, so they those people who come influence of this person, they turn them into also a deeds. They don't wait for the dreams. They say that work and work. It's also affecting third house, so always been trying to do something new, and ultimately it's affecting 10th house also. So deeds. So everywhere, if you find that the first house Saturn will be just not for focusing on the whatever it is going on the soul part, but whatever soul has done in the earlier life, they are don't bother, but they just focus on this life. If you just speak this certain people about the illusion or about the something to be image, they don't image. They say what is reality is a reality. One has to perform means perform. Sometimes it is found that they are not believing on the fate, they are not believing on the future or the luck. Why? Because they in their life suffer so much, and they have bring everything by themselves. So they don't trust on this thing. They say no, only deeds will prevail. So such a kind of people, sometimes people misunderstand as a lazy, as you have mentioned. Sadish Charai Nama means who moved very slow. And there was a story behind it. We don't have to focus that story. But ultimately the crux means that it always moves with the time. Why Saturn doesn't give the result immediately, as we have discussed in the Vakrigraha summit, that during the retrogression Saturn very fast immediately gives the result of and I give the viewers that do watch our Vakrigraha summit. Too much this we have shared. So here what happened, that Saturn being why Saturn doesn't give on time, because whatever we follow the time, what we have a clock, it's the earth clock which round about the sun, and sun is not a result oriented, result given by the Saturn. So our clock doesn't match with the Saturn clock. We turn in our earth sun by 1 year, whereas Saturn takes 30 years to turn around. So that is why it is delaying, and that is why the Rishi Muni says Sanisharai Nama, slow move. Go with the slow and steady. That is why in my Saturn video I say Sunny delay but sure. It gives the result. Only thing is people have to have a patience and should be performing the things continuously. So those having a Saturn in first house, I can advise just start the deeds from what age you are, but start something, do something, so that one day you will come out with the good amount of deeds, and your fame, fate, or future has to give you a result. So that is my something little contribution about the Saturn in the first house. You may start about this, your views.
Thank you, Dr. Dharmesh. I agree, and everything you said resonate with me very deeply. as I look into Saturn in the first house, I want to talk about it from a physical perspective first. So from an Ayurvedic perspective, Saturn is mostly a Vata type planet. So you have a strong Vata influence in the constitution. Now, the first house can show the physical structure of the person. So also people with Saturn in the first house, they can be very tall. They can be very skinny. They generally tend to have a tall and a skinny disposition. Now, if there are other kapha influences in the chart, this might make up for it. But if there are other Vata influences in chart with combination with the Saturn and the ascendant, it does make for a very light and airy and kind of Vata type constitutional person. It's a very heavy impact to have Saturn in the first house, because the first house on some level is affecting you every day. It's affecting the influence of the energy in your body. And as Dr. Dharmesh mentioned, that is like covering over the light of the sun. And if you go back to the mantra of Shani, it says that the dark cloud of Shani is so great that it can even cover over the light of the sun. So there is this strong vibration of Saturn in the first house. It does, as mentioned by Dr. Dharmesh, in some ways guarantee results, especially if it's in a good dignity, especially if it's in a good position, because Saturn is a planet that often delays, but it does not deny. But Shani having this effect in the ascendant means there are certain lessons in the life that are emphasized for the individual, which might not be particularly enjoyable, but are the greatest for our spiritual growth. Because it also says that no spiritual change or growth manifests without Saturn. Yeah, we learn from Mercury and we learn spiritually from Jupiter, but how do we integrate that spiritual wisdom? It's through Shani Deva. So there is this vibration here of the integration of our spiritual work, our spiritual service, our spiritual responsibility on the material world, on the mundane world, on the earthly realm. So the issue, I also like to consider Shani as the planet which gives us virtues. But when Shani is in the first house, I always say to the individual, you're seeking to become a virtuous soul. And but the idea of becoming virtue is that it cannot be measured. You cannot measure virtue. You cannot say, I am 50% patient, I am 30% humble, I am 50% honest. These are arbitrary evaluations. These are random numbers. There's no way to exactly assert how much value or virtue that an individual has. So I like to think of Saturn as the one that determines how virtuous that you are. But the only way to become virtuous is for your virtue to be tested or challenged. And so Shani is the great tester. Shani is the great challenger. And it tests us and challenges us. Those test or challenge, it helps us become a more patient person. Sun is the ego, and Saturn shadow is over the sun. So also there is a strong karma of Shani, which is to humble us. It's to make us more patient. It's to make us more humble, and it's to make us more accepting. And so when Shani is in the first house, over the course of the lifetime of the individual, no matter what the position is, the person becomes more patient over their lifetime, the person becomes more humble over their lifetime, the person becomes more accepting of their lifetime. Accepting of conditions or situations that might be difficult to accept. Part of the energy of Shani is adversity. And there's two responses we can have to adversity. And this can be seen based on the position or dignity of the Shani. But when we have adversity, which is when we ride on a horse and then the horse kicks us off, we have two options. We can either run away from the horse, which means we don't want to try again, even though there has been some adversity. But if Saturn is in good dignity and Saturn has good power, you will get back on that horse and you will try again and you will ride that horse like the best horse jockey that there is. So the willingness to overcome adversity, the willingness to come over obstacles, that does have a strong position of Saturn in the first house, but also those obstacles and adversities that exist. So I also say with Saturn in the first house that the grass is greener on the other side. So when the obstacles show up, when the adversities show up, when the challenges show up and you want to give up and you want to surrender and you want to throw in the towel, that's the most important time not to give up. That's the most important time to keep on pushing, to keep on trying your best. And guess what? That's when the rewards of Shani really begin to come. Why? Because we deserve them. Because we've done the karmic work. We've put in our time. We've put in our dedication. So Shani rewards, but Shani only rewards when we truly deserve something. So you do have to overcome and do lots of work when Shani is in the first house. But also, if you stay determined, if you stay disciplined, if you stay focused, those rewards should be plentiful, considering the strength and dignity of Shani, of course, as well. But that's just a little bit of Shani in the first house, which I wanted to share. And I hope that was interesting for our viewers. And I look forward to hearing about your insight into Saturn's position in Aries, Dr. Dharmesh.
Yeah. Very well said, Kṣaṇāti. That's outer influence of a Saturn, what physically it affects, as you have mentioned very correctly. Now, if we consider that the Aries ascendant and Saturn in the first house, so what happened that in Saturn, this is a double-headed sign for the Saturn, we all know, because here the sun rises. That is the first sign of a Kalpurusha. So whenever your first birth is there, you have not perform any deeds. That is why deeds are zero here. Why in the Aries the Saturn is debilitated? Because you just started. Your soul has been given an opportunity. Do something. So here there is no karmic things are balanced. That is why here the Saturn has put as a zero or debilation. Where the more thing is that just to make a awareness of own self, why you have taken birth. So those having a Saturn debilation, it always repeated every 30 years. So whenever the Saturn is debilitated, you see the generation born during that Saturn debilation, they are the person who rules. They are the person who reach the position very fast. And I know in the 98, 99, 2000, the Saturn was debilitated. Those children who were born in the 98, 99, they all are the people now, they are ruling the IT world. And those who are in the 70s, because in 70s also 69, 70, 71 also, the Saturn was debilitated. Those people are also very well dominating the business class, or they are into the top position wise. Why? Because their soul is so much pure. They got the first chance as to perform their deeds. So Saturn in the Aries, being is seeing the Rashi Lord is a Mars, and the Saturn place when in the Mars sign. So always there is a container, like Aries is a container on which the planet has been placed. So what happened that the planet when placed into the container, the value of a container increase. So being a Saturn seated in the Aries sign, the people start performing their act. Saturn in the Aries also indicate that you have a gap between this life and the earlier life. Maybe the spiritual people only can understand this situation, but this is also indicating when the Saturn in the Aries, that means your past life and this your present life has a very much gap, and that gap you have to fill in this life by putting so many efforts. Talking on the spiritual part, but if you see in the material part, they are very less inclined to the material things and just very hardworking people. Maybe 16 to 18 hours they work, and they always into the result oriented, always been focused at how to produce the result. So that is their main object. In whichever house it is there, see, we are only talking the Aries sign. So whichever the house it is placed, that house result also one has to add. But being in the Saturn in the Aries sign, being it's debilitated, and suppose there is no Nicha Bhanga Rajyog, no cancellation of debilation, then this Saturn will make you start something new, and you will reach in your top by 30 years. So that only small addition about the Saturn in the Aries. Now you may also share the Aries Saturn.
Thank you, Dr. Dharmesh. That was quite illuminating, and I'm very appreciative for your insights. When I think about the Saturn in Aries, first I think of Aries as a fixed karmic sign, and then Saturn as the planet which has a lot of our karmic load. So a lot of times there are very heavy fixed karmas within the life when Saturn is positioned in Aries. And when I started studying Jyotish, I thought and asked my teacher, well, why is Saturn debilitation in Aries? Well, Aries ruler is Mangal, Mars. And whenever you have a relationship with Saturn and Mars, that is a difficult aspect. That is a very difficult aspect. Additionally, that the three nakshatras within Aries are Ashwini, which is Ketu, Bharani, which is Venus, and Kritika, which is Sun. So we know that Saturn has difficult relationship with Ketu and Sun, and also the position of Bharani combined with Mars, that is also a difficult position. So the combination of energies, it doesn't really matter which nakshatra. I do kind of feel like Saturn does a little better in Bharani nakshatra than in Kritika or in Ashwini nakshatra, but still it's debilitation. And that means that there is some heavy fixed karma that the person has to work through. Now, this isn't always negative, have negative material impact on the world. It depends if the person likes the material world and the mundane world or not. In other words, I have read many chart with Saturn position in Aries, and they are very successful businessmen, and they are very successful businesswomen, and they work very hard because one thing that we mentioned is one of the names of Saturn is Shudra, which means servant. So when Saturn is in this very strong fixed debilitation sign of Aries, they can be a servant to whichever house the Shani falls in. So if there is some influence to work, and we will see this as it plays out through the 12 houses, there is some servant energy. But when it's debilitated, it is very fixed. So it always feels like you're in this servant or service type energy towards your work. And it could be very financially lucrative. It could be very financially and materially successful. And if there are other strong combinations that are spiritual in the chart, I think it can be a nice balance between a material aspect of the chart and a spiritual aspect of the chart. But it is a very kind of materialistic vibration. And these people are very driven to success because of the Aries vibration. They are driven towards ambition. They are driven towards motivation. They are goal-driven. But Shani is there. So they have a hard time reaching their goals. They have a hard time dealing with adversities and obstacles as it relates to our goals. And sometimes I call Saturn and Mars the hamster in the wheel scenario. So when Saturn is debilitated, sometimes these natives can feel like a hamster in a cage. And if you've ever seen a hamster in a cage, there's a wheel, and the hamster keeps spinning on the wheel, and usually in front of wheel, there's a little piece of cheese. And that little piece of cheese is the Aries vibration. I want to get closer to the cheese. I want to get closer to the goal. But Saturn is Mahakala. So things happen on the will of the God. Things happen on the will of God's time, of divine time. But our understanding of time is not necessarily in alignment with the divine time. So we can keep running and running and running and spinning in the wheel, and then the hamster will pass out on the side of the hamster wheel, very exhausted. So people with Saturn and Aries, from a remedial perspective, because I know we wanted to bring in some slight remedies, is when you have a goal, think of the race as being, it's better to be the turtle and not to be the hare or the rabbit. There's this great story of a turtle and a rabbit which are racing. And the rabbit is running, and he is running so fast, but he gets tired before the finish line. Even though the turtle takes its time to take very slowly to get to the finish line, because the rabbit tires out and passes too quickly, the turtle is the first to pass the finish line. So people with Saturn and Aries, don't keep running for the cheese like the rabbit. Keep moving slowly and steady and progressing and taking certain steps, but being very patient and taking and building things slowly over a long period of time versus trying to do anything too accelerated or too quickly, just as a remedial perspective on Saturn and Aries as well. And I hope our viewers will appreciate that. And I look forward to discussing with Dr. Dharmesh Saturn in the second house and Saturn in the Taurus position.
Yeah. So very well you narrated the story of hare and tortoise. Yeah, that's Saturn and the Mars chasing each other, but ultimately the Saturn wins in the long run.
Yeah.
Very good. That's a good example. Now, considering the second house and Saturn being a lot of karmic, in second house, what happened that you try to accumulate the things. I always say the second house is a combination, joint treasury, and whatever you earn. So whether you earn in the relationship, whether you earn in the monetary way, whether you earn with your speech, whatever taste. So all these things which you accumulated in the second house, whether Saturn is there. So Saturn is like a rationing. Is always give when it's a necessity. That is why I always say Saturn gives on not need base. Whatever your need is there, it is not Saturn who fulfill your needs, but it always give on the necessity base. What you necessity. So Saturn being in the second house, they always values their language, their speech. When it is necessary, then only their speech. When there is a necessary, they only spend the money. Whenever necessary, they always being there to help the family. So for family, for money, for all these things, it is very essential for the people having a Saturn in the second house, because they are the people who value everything and give as per the necessity, never been waste anything. So they never waste their relation by over expecting or over depending, never waste their money because they know how to save. And sometimes people misunderstood Saturn as a miser. See, Saturn is not a miser. He will always teach you that what is necessary for you, just go behind that. You may not fulfill all your needs, but you will be always getting whatever is necessity for you. See, for that example, I always put the beggars. You know, the beggars and poor who are not having their livelihood, even they are the people, they get their 24 or 2200 calories at a day because of a surety of a Saturn. We all know that poor and beggars people are under the influence of a Saturn because they don't wish to work, they don't work, and they are just begging. And that is why they never come up with this. So never taste the Saturn, never taste your relation, never taste your money, what can be done with the money. Because there's an ample Saturn power in the second house, and by sitting the second house, it will control your eighth house, your lifespan. It is a very good, it's a karak of a significant of eighth house aspecting, it give you a long life. It aspecting the fourth house, being the third aspect into the fourth house, it will not make you beyond some pleasure and not make you run behind all kind of a pleasure. As well as it is also aspecting your 10th, 11th house. By aspecting the 11th house, it will control your desire fulfillment. and not make you run behind the desire fulfillment. So all this way, the Saturn being in the second house will be very great for the people who always value their relation, they always values their money, and they always values food, speech, anything pertaining to the second house. So that is why I like the Saturn in the second house. We'll discuss the Taurus later on once you put your input about the second house. Then we discuss about the Taurus so that it will won't be conflict. Means it don't match each other. So you may start with the Saturn in the second house, and then we discuss in the Taurus.
Thank you, Dr. Dharmesh. That was a very comprehensive analysis of Saturn in the second house. Saturn in the second house is the first house of Arta Bhava. And when we think of the second house, it's also called the house of wealth. But Arta means more than just wealth. It is our ability to be independent. It is our ability to provide for ourselves materially. And if we are truly blessed in the Arta, it is our ability to help provide for others materially. And so when you find Saturn in the second house, which is our responsibility and our karma, and it's activating the second house of Arta, we have a lot of responsibility, we have a lot of karma in terms of our work, our job, our career, our finances. So this is why people have to be careful with spending, and generally people with Saturn in the second house, it's a minimalization energy. So unless Saturn is very afflicted or weak or has a difficult dignity here, the person will usually only spend money on things which they need to spend money on. And they also like to spend money on older things. So they might like to buy an old car for a little bit of money, and then they fix up the new car, and then they resell the old car. But this is Saturn in the second house, though, because of Shani effect. It shows for them to get the accumulated wealth that they would like to get. It's not a quick process. Oftentimes, people with Saturn in the second house, although financial wealth is often guaranteed, especially if Saturn is strong, but they have to work at least 40 hours a week, sometimes 50 or 60 hours a week. And they have to work 5, 10, 15 years before they are able to accumulate the money that they would like to collect. But usually I see that people start to get the rewards of the wealth when their Saturn Mahadasha is over and when their Saturn return is over, when the Saturn is in the second house. So that's when the rewards of the wealth can come. But it does not come without hard work. It does not come without taking very little sick days. It does not come without taking very little vacations. You must always stay dedicated to the work. You must always stay devoted to the work. And that's just one aspect of Saturn in the second house. As Dr. Dharmesh mentioned, there are many other important aspects of the second house, and this is a house of how we say things. And so oftentimes people with Saturn in the second house, they can speak a little bit slower. They can, and sometimes slower speech, especially when it's in a good position, it's very beneficial to say some, and it's also seldom. Saturn can also be called seldom. So sometimes with people in the second house, they don't talk unless they feel that they have to. People with strong Mercury, they will talk all the time for no reason. People with strong Saturn, they wait for a very important time, which it is to talk, and then they will do the slow talking. And this is something with Saturn in the second house. And there's a great quote, I think it's by Abraham Lincoln, which I think reflects Saturn in the second house. He used to say, you can have everyone think you're a fool, or you can start talking and remove all of their doubts. Which means sometimes it's better to say nothing than it is to say something. And people with Saturn in the second house have, this is part of their evolutionary energy with Saturn, is it's better to say something very important at the right time than to constantly be talking. And it'll be interesting to see people with Saturn in the second house where their Mercury also sits in their chart. And then, as mentioned, the second house is, what we put in our mouth. So people with Saturn in the second house, they have a unique relationship with food, especially if it's in a difficult dignity. Sometimes they're restrictive with their foods. Maybe they can eliminate certain foods from their diet that other people like to eat. But Saturn is also can be considered tamasic. So people with Saturn in the second house can often like the taste of meat. They can often like the taste of things that are very grounding to the Vata dosha, so more heavier food. So even though Saturn is in the second house of food, you would think that they would be skinny and everything, but that's more Saturn in the first house. Saturn in the second house shows that you do have a very unique relationship with food. And I've seen people with Saturn in the second house surprisingly being on the heavier side. And then another interesting is the house of the family. So when Saturn is in the second house, Shudra, servant, these people are very servant to their family. They like to make their family happy. They like to be in service for their family. And hopefully if Saturn's in a good position, their family is appreciative. But sometimes if Saturn is in a very difficult position in the second house, the person is very giving into their family, but their family might not be the healthiest area for them to always be giving to. Maybe it would be more beneficial to give to the homeless. Maybe it would be more beneficial to give to the elderly. Maybe it would be more beneficial to give to the sick, because often with Saturn, helping the people that really need it. But nonetheless, just to bring a little remedy into it, but Saturn in the second house is very important, a natural inclination for being family-oriented. But Saturn also represents separation and isolation. So at certain times, we can feel separated or isolated from certain family members and close with others. You can see this dichotomy wherever Saturn shows up. So at certain times with Saturn in the second house, you are close with one family member and you are not close with another. And then it switches. You're close with that family member and then you're not close with the other. And although the Saturn in the second house wants to have a good relationship with everyone, often one family member is more distant than the other. And we can see that often where Saturn shows up, whichever house it's applicated in. So those are just some of my insights on Saturn in the second house. And I am curious to hear Dr. Dharmesh's insights on Saturn in Taurus position.
Yeah. So very well, we both have give a justification for the second house Saturn. Now, looking for the Taurus, it's a very comfortable house for the Saturn. Saturn, after himself, he believes the Venus only. Because, there's always a combination of pleasure and pain. After the pleasure, you'll feel a pain. And after the pain, you always feel the pleasure. And that is why the Friday, after the Friday, there is a Saturday. And from pleasure, pain come immediately sometime. But after the pain, pleasure comes a very long turn to complete the circle. So it is a sign of a Taurus. Taurus, that is a Venus. Taurus means a Venus. In Taurus ascendant, Saturn has a very important role of a Yoga Karaka planet. And it's occupied the two better house of by the Saturn. So literally the Taurus sign having a very good combination with the Saturn. Although if we insidely see, there's all the three enemy stars are there. As you mentioned, Kritika, Rohini and Mrigashrish, they are not favorable with the Saturn. But I have seen the Saturn in the Taurus, being it's a Venus as a dispositor is a very favorable. It's a friendly house for the Saturn. And those having the Saturn in the Taurus, they don't go extreme to the pleasure, because the Taurus sign is for the pleasure. We all know the Libra is also sign of pleasure. But Libra is a pleasure to show the world, whereas a Taurus is a pleasure for own self. So while you have a Saturn in the Taurus, that means you will not going to show your pleasure to somebody else. You go in some corner and eat something, and you're not showing the people that I have eaten this, I went to this hotels and this. So pleasure, they enjoy the pleasure being a Taurus Saturn, but they don't disclose, they don't spread that as a news. So very favorable sign for the Saturn, friendly sign, very active sign, and being a Yokarak planet for the Taurus ascendant, the Saturn plays a very important role. But there is always a chasing of pain and pleasure, pain on pleasure, or pleasure on pain. But I found that it's a very unique combination of Saturn being in the Taurus rather than in the Gemini. So I like the Saturn in the Taurus sign. You may put your insight.
Yes, I agree, Dr. Dharmesh. Thank you for your insights. I also like the Saturn in the Taurus sign. I mean, there is no coincidence if Saturn is exalted in the Libra sign that it would also do beneficially in the Taurus sign. And from a traditional relationship, there is a friendly, benefic relationship between Saturn and Venus, although it doesn't always play out that way. But traditionally speaking, they have to have a friendly relationship. Now, that means they're working together to teach us lessons, but those lessons that they're teaching us aren't always comfortable. Now, people with Saturn in the Taurus sign, Taurus is a sign which has to do with material accumulation and material wealth. And so there is this significance of Saturn of having the proper relationship to the material world. So people with Saturn and Taurus, one of the big lessons I feel that they go throughout their lifetime or they have to learn is, how do I have the proper relationship with the material world? And Saturn is a planet which tests us, and it can test us in two different ways. And this is what Dr. Dharmesh was mentioning. Sometimes Saturn and Taurus tests us by having no money. And when we have no money, that we can place too little value or too much value on money by having not enough money. Also, Saturn and Taurus can give us too much money. And when it gives you too much money, you also give too much importance to the money. So there is a deeper lesson when Saturn and Taurus, which is that money allows you to do everything that you would like to do in life, to have the experiences that you would have, to go to the places that you would like to go. And because Taurus is a sign of groundedness, stability, and security, you need a certain amount of financial stability and security to experience groundedness in your life. And that's a strong lesson. But even though you need a certain amount of material security and stability, you cannot overvalue the money and you cannot undervalue the money. God or spirituality is always more important than money. Our family should be always important than money. Our health and our dharma should always be more important than money. So this is an important lesson for Taurus Lagna, never to put material goals ahead of these things. But also, like I said, for Taurus, Saturn Taurus, do not renunciate the money. Do not renunciate the asset. Do not renunciate the home. Do not renunciate the family. But also understand their importance in your life to have the internal pleasurable experiences, as Dr. Dharmesh mentioned. So those are just some of my little insights on the Saturn in the Taurus position, and having the right relationship to the material world, not undervaluing and not overvaluing it, really showing up. And I'm very curious to hear, as we get into the first Upachaya house, your insights on Saturn in the third house, Dr. Dharmesh ji.
Yeah, very well said about the Taurus Saturn. That's a combination of pain and pleasure. Now entering into the third house, the Saturn, this is the first house where Saturn gives the neutral result. So it's a house of Mars. Actually, it's a Kalpurusha, it is a Mercury house, but as for the significator or Karaka, it is a Mars. This is a house of courage, and you don't need a courage while you are doing your karma, while fulfill the duty. When you fulfill your duties or you are performing your deeds, actually you don't need a courage because that has to be done. Something you want to do first time, something you want to try. Suppose you want to experiment something, something you want to try, then the Mars is a right. But here you are just doing your given deeds. You are performing only as per the script. So here the Saturn is not giving so good result. Maybe in the Gemini it may give the result, but normally the Saturn in the seventh house, people are not getting a good result because they think they want to do something new. They want to try something new, and Saturn is not allowing. Saturn say, let us complete first past deeds. Let us complete your duties. Let us complete whatever the deeds you have to perform. Why you are running behind the things which is not so important, and whatever the things are so important, you are neglecting. So that judgment, that balancing Saturn makes in the third house. While it's a relation with the brothers, there will be always a hardship. While relation with the neighbors, it is always hardship because you always perform your part of a duty, and then only you always try to expect something from them. And you are under the influence of Saturn, not they. That is why there is always a dispute between you and your brothers, siblings, you and your neighbors, you and your own courage. Sometimes your courage also doesn't support you, or you yourself doesn't support with your courage. You'll feel that why did you do something new? There's a house of we all know it's a expectation, it's a desire house where the people have lots of a desire. While Saturn sitting is sitting here, it slow down all the desire. So one after another, what happened? Your desire doesn't fulfill, so you let everything for the God. This is a house of, I believe so, it's a subconscious mind. So Saturn always keeping in the mind that the deeds are important and not how you perform, not the courage you have to put. You have to just simply do your deeds. And the time is a sense of everything. So time will give everything on the whatever the efforts you have put. The Saturn in the third house also affecting your fifth house. So your past karmas, it is affecting your ninth house, your future karmas, and it is affecting your 12th house also. 12th house is whatever you get after the death, that's like a moksha, or that like again to take a rebirth, because rebirth also plant in the 12th house or moksha. Either your soul is free, or either there is some pending karmas are there, so you have to come back. So all this karmic house, it is affecting fifth house, ninth house, and 11th house. If suppose the Saturn is very powerful in third house, that means your inclination towards the spirituality more. And some of the other day you may renounce the world and you'll go to some cage and do the all kind of a sadhana. So here you don't have to put any courage. Saturn will give you everything with the regular interval. You don't have to put much efforts. You don't have to try something new, experiment anything. You have to just follow what you are doing and what your soul say, what your time say, and whatever the deeds or the capacity you have. So that way the Saturn is not so favorable for the third house as you want to do something new. And Saturn say, let's complete first the pending karmas, not to start anything. So that's my input about the third house. Now you may share about your third house things about the Upachaya Sthana.
Yes, everything you said was right, hit the nail on the head. And I would just like to add a few more comments. What I want to say is that we see a characteristic taking place where a malefic planet is now in an inauspicious house, because when we look at houses 3, 6, 8, 12, we're looking at traditionally inauspicious houses which have more inauspicious energy than others. But there is also written by many great astrology teachers that when a malefic planet is in one of these malefic houses, there is some auspicious effect which takes place from that. It's not completely auspicious. We got to be realistic that there's a mixed effect, but it's not the worst position. You know, people are like, oh, my Saturn's in the 3rd house, my Saturn's in the 6th house, my Saturn's in the 8th house, my Saturn's in the 12th house. Those are not bad positions. So this is something to consider when we look at traditional malefic positions, and how when they're in malefic or inauspicious houses, it's really not that bad at all. Now, when you look at this Saturn, is Shudra. And the 3rd house is this upachaya, self-improvement or self-evolution. So these people, as an aspects the 9th house as well. So these people are very focused on bettering themselves, becoming a better person. How do I grow? How do I evolve? How do I become more disciplined? How do I become more ambition? How do I become more motivation? How do I set better intentions? And constantly, this position is very helpful for the growing throughout the individual's lifetime. And this is also a house of communication, expression, and creative ability. So earlier in the life, before they go through Saturn return, but they go through Saturn dasha, they might have certain difficulties with their expression. Like they might have a lisp, or they might have a difficult time expressing themselves. You can even think of it spiritually as there being some kind of block upon the throat chakra. But as they go through Saturn dasha, as they go through Saturn return, they learn how to express themselves. They can become great writers. They can become great actors. They can have creative abilities as well. So in music, and especially if Saturn is in Libra or Taurus, another Venus sign, or there's some Saturn-Venus aspect or conjunction. So the 3rd house, it does help us grow throughout our lifetime. And depending on the dignity of Saturn, which sits in the 3rd house, it shows how much growth there is to do. Because if Saturn is very exalted position in the 3rd house, the person it will become very naturally for them to have very good intentions. It will come very naturally for them to have very good ambitions and for them to be very disciplined. And same with Saturn and Capricorn. They will be very organized. They will be very structured. But if Saturn is in let's say, Aries or Scorpio or Cancer or Leo, well, things get more complicated in this situation when Saturn is in the 3rd house. So that's one element. Now, of course, this is the house of siblings. And wherever Saturn is, we're going to be tested. So oftentimes, no matter what, if you have siblings, they're going to test you. I don't know one person whose siblings don't test them at one time or the other. But one of the very unique positions of Saturn in the 3rd house is it is their karmic tie. It is their karmic relationship for the sibling to test you. So they are like a blessing from Lord Shiva, because Lord Shiva is connected to Shani Deva. Your siblings are a blessing from Lord Shiva. That doesn't mean that it's an easy relationship, because they are there to test you. They are there to push you. They are there to show you the shadow. But it is all there to help you spiritually grow. It is all help there because of upachaya to help you spiritually evolve. And that's why the first upachaya house is also the house of siblings. Because what's the karmic nature of the relationship with siblings? I'm going to help you grow and support you, and you're going to help support me grow and believe in me. But when Saturn is in the 3rd house, this becomes a huge part of our service. So if you do have a sibling and you have Saturn in the 3rd house, even though it might be difficulties there, one of the remedial aspects is to try and be in service towards the sibling. And also, when I talk about the expression, think about if there's any blocks around the expression and trying to confidently, because it can remove the courage as was expressed. But if you evolutionarily work with this energy, it will increase the courage. If you're willing to do the work that Saturn tests you, it increases the courage. It increases the motivation. It increases the ambition. So you have to be willing to do the work, and that's always the rule with Saturn. We can either do the work and grow slowly, or we can not do the work and move backwards. To me, it only seems like they're one choice, but I guess there's technically two. And but it will be interesting to see Saturn's position in the third house, if it's in fixed, dual, or movable sign, to see how stubborn or determined or focused this person is in their path of their growth, in their path of their evolution. So those are just some of my insights on the Saturn in the third house position. I hope that was interesting, and I look forward to hearing Dr. Dharmesh's insights into the Saturn in Mithuna.
Yeah, very well said that the negative house and negative planets, that's a rule of a minus, minus, plus. So here that's a rule apply, as you mentioned, 3, 6, 8, 8, 12. So here the house negative and the planet negative, when two negative force clash each other, that turn to the positive. So that's geometry rules applies here. Now considering the Gemini, the Saturn in the Gemini. See, Gemini is a sign of a confusion, we always say, because it's a duality in all the prospect. Mercury being a dual, the symbol of the sign is also dual. So here it says that a Gemini sign, in the Gemini sign when the Saturn is there, it's a creation of some confusion. And you always try to sort it out, all the kind of a solution, confusion for others, and you are still creating new confusion in the other's life. For communication also, because it's a sign of a communication. Being a third Kalpurusha sign, it's a sign of a sibling also. So there is always a lack of a communication. So in relation, so it is found that even though having a good context in their life, having a better opportunity to also show that context, but still they are not able to materialize all this their context into the reality. Being Gemini is from Capricorn, it is in the good sequence, but it is not good for the Capricorn, as this is a 6-8 from each other. But for Aquarius, it's a good sign of a triangle, and they follow the same of Vayu Tattva. So Gemini being a Aries sign, Saturn being itself as a Aries sign, it's a comfortable. But that communication is not so clear. Sometimes it's misleading, sometimes it is misunderstood or misconceptual. So sometimes we have to be very careful about the Gemini Saturn when they are trying to communicate something, something misappropriate will happen, and because of that all the things will get into negative. So that is somewhat about the Gemini Saturn. Not so bad, not so good. Being a friendly house, it is always try to make you on the right path. So that's a input of Saturn in the Gemini sign. Now you may share.
Thank you, Dr. Dharmesh. That was very illuminating, as always. And just a few things for me to add on is I like to look at things from Ayurvedic perspective, because always Dr. Vasant Lad, he was one of my first teachers. So you have Saturn, which is Vata planet, and you have Gemini, which has a lot of wind. So you have double Vata influence. So this can be very... this is considered a friendly position because Saturn and Mercury have friendship, but it is not always the most easiest position. Because of all the Vata element, the one side of it wants to move slowly, which is the Saturn, and the Gemini, it's more move quickly. And then also Saturn wants to be introverted. Saturn is an introverted energy, when Gemini is an extroverted energy. Gemini likes to be social. Gemini likes to communicate. Gemini likes to have fun. Saturn likes to stay at home and watch the raindrops fall. So these energies are somewhat dualistic to each other, and I think that's one of the things Dr. Dharmesh was hitting at when he was saying this is a neutral or mixed position, even though it's a friendly sign, position. So, but this often does give person very strong intellect. Saturn and Gemini people have a very strong intellect, but often their intellect is misunderstood. Because Gemini has a planet of learning, but sign of learning, but Saturn is Shani. So they do learn things, but they learn things very slowly. So the quick student in the class might learn something in 1 month and grasp 90% of the knowledge. When the person with Saturn and Gemini in the class might take them 6 months, 1 year, 2 years to learn the information, but they will grasp 99% of the wisdom. They will grasp 99% of the knowledge. So it does take longer for the educational process to unfold, but it also guarantees a greater learning at the end of the position. So that is part of the challenge, is having to learn slowly, having to study many things, having to memorize many things, having to read many things. Because Saturn and Gemini shows that learning doesn't always come easy. It requires great discipline. It requires great service, servant energy. But if we give to that energy, it should be very beneficial. And also because Gemini is this social sign, and Saturn is the planet of separation. You can think of it separation from the sun. That this energy means that sometimes, even though you want to be included in the social circumstance or situation, or you might want to go outside, there is this other part of you which says, I don't want to do anything. I just want to be by myself. I just want to be alone. I just want to take it easy. So it's important that from a remedial perspective, as we throw little remedies in there, here and there, that for Saturn and Gemini people, social life is important. Getting out of the introverted space is important. That means don't isolate. Don't alienate yourself from your friends. Don't alienate yourself from your coworkers. And even though it takes a long time to learn, here's one of the things that happens with Gemini, Saturn and Gemini, which I have noticed. I have new interest. Let me start taking this new interest. And I start taking this new interest, and after 1 month, I don't learn enough that I want to learn, and I quit the new interest. So they can go from one interest to another, one interest to another, one interest to another. But if they were to stick with one interest for, let's say, 1 year, 2 year, then they start to get the highest position in the energy. Like someone who wants to do karate, so they get the white belt, and they are stuck at the white belt for a very long time, which is the lowest type of martial belt. But then after their dedication and devotion of 2-3 years, they'll be double black belt with yellow stripes. They'll be able to cut their hand through 10 pieces of wood. So there is this process of don't give up, keep on going, keep pushing on, and try not to give up on things just because you don't learn them quickly, but rather stick with things and try to learn things over a long period of time. I hope that insight wasn't helpful for the Saturn and Gemini.
Yeah, very well narrated. Saturn and Gemini. That's a misunderstand of a communication or the ideas is the main core part. That's very well said. And the remedy part is very essential. And I add on to the remedy is that whatever they feel, they should write, because the third house is a matter of a writing. So sometimes it happens that you're not able to express your views directly by mouth, but whatever the feelings you feel, if you reduce in writing, it may be a novel, it may be a biography for others. So that will be, that way the people can communicate, and that way the people can understand you better. So whoever having the Saturn in the Gemini, they should write down whatever the feelings they have, and one day they will feel that the people are more understanding them by reading this. So that's an addition remedy I can suggest. Now move on to the fourth house Saturn, and that's a very tough house for the Saturn because it doesn't like to have a pleasure, because you can't sleep and work. Both cannot be possible. Yeah, nightmares is a different story, but still you are lying in the sleeping. So fourth house is a house of pleasure and Saturn is a house of deeds. Just both are just opposite to each other. If we see the Kalpurusha, pleasure in the fourth house and Saturn being a lord of a 10th house, so that will be a total a new dimension, both the angle. So when Saturn in the fourth house, as we know that is a Shani Sharayanama slow moving, so here the person feel that his pleasure are not coming on the time, whether the inputs from the mother, whether the feelings pass to them from the mother, whether the land or property or the any material pleasure or anything car or luxury comfort, education, everything, they see that the people are moving very fast and they are just remaining in one position for a long duration. But it is always better to have a habit of a staircase rather than the lift. So that is a main story about the fourth house Saturn. You must always value the pleasure after the sweat of brow. When there's anything received, immediately, instantly, you'll never value. But when you get the things after the very hardship, you always value. So after the doing 16, 17 hours of hardship, you see you will get a better sleep. Why? That's a Saturn, then pleasure. What we need, what we expect, first pleasure, then we will work. So that's not a combination for the Saturn in the fourth house. He will see, he will always guide you that first you put your efforts, then you wait for the heavenly bless. So you'll get a pleasure. One thing is Saturn being in the fourth house, that's a surety that you have a minimum place for resident. You have minimum pleasure of everything. So all the necessity things which a one person need to stay in the pleasant situation, you have it. Yeah, it's not a Mars, it's not a Venus to give on the extremity. Why people always believe or trust on Saturn? Because Saturn is the only surety that whatever the deeds you will do, it will give you a result. See what the other planets are playing the role which we don't understand. That sun gives the glossy things. We all come into the influence of the sun. When we see some reputed person, when we see a signing person, we always get envy. So when it gives the rising, it gives the lighting, is also creating burning sensation inside. Moon is a mood. When you are in a good mood, you perform better. When you are not good mood, so all these planets have a fluctuating result, whereas Saturn have very steady. One thing is decided that what Saturn has to give, it will give at any age. Why surety Saturn has? Because it's also a significant of a death. So prior to the death, whatever the house Saturn occupies, whatever the house Saturn rules, this is the second biggest planet after the Jupiter, which affect your 10th house. Because 2 house it sign, 1 house it will place, 3 house it will aspect, and 4th house it is significator. So altogether 10th house it is going to have a slowly progress, it will always do. And you see the house which is not affected by Saturn, just one has to just test anti Saturn way. The house which is not being occupied, aspected, significator or ruler of the Saturn, that house will never come into the light. Why? Because that house may not have a time. Because we say Saturn as a Kala. We all know that Saturn is a Kal. Kal means a time, Samay, your time. So that house which is not influenced by the Saturn anyhow, that house number may not appear in this your lifetime. So that might be a secret for you to see that which are the house will be silent in this life, and which are the house will be always you are chasing, you are always trying, you are performing best out of it. Accept the pleasure. See, pleasure may be a material pleasure like a Mars. It's only a pleasure like a Venus, pleasure of education, or pleasure from the mother. Any kind of a pleasure. See, pleasure have a different dimension. For one person, the mobile is a necessity. For another person, those who are not working, it is only a pleasure for them. So it's a depend person to person, but all the kind of a pleasure. If you wish to get all kind of a pleasure, you are lucky if you are Saturn in the fourth house. So once in a while in your life, you will be touching all kind of a pleasure of your fourth house. If you are blessed with the Saturn in the fourth house, what it will do with the fourth house? It will aspect your sixth house. So it will control your desire. It will control your disease. It will control your debt. So it will not allow you to purchase the house with a heavy loan. So that is why Saturn gives the old house, because we are comfortable. You have a roof, you have a four wall, and you have a furniture. So why you need to take a loan? So that's a surety Saturn gives. Is it not a good? It is giving you always aspecting on your deeds. So whenever you are about to sleep, no, see that's the beauty of a Saturn in fourth house. Then when they get a sleep and they're about to go to the bed, they immediately remember, oh, I have to do this work. I left this. Because it is directly aspecting 10th house. It's directly aspecting 10th house, and it is also awakening the first house. It is also aspecting the first house. So immediately leaving aside your pleasure, leaving aside your bed, you'll go and complete. See, many of the viewers may be facing that at the time of sleeping, they come to know, oh, I forget this thing. It's a very important thing. Even though they put the notes of tomorrow's, or they complete the things, they call the people, they accumulate the data, what they need to do for the day. So this is the surety of the Saturn. It will not allow you to sleep before completing your dates. So that's a beauty Saturn gives. So that is, I believe that's enough for my side. It's now a turn of yourself. So to unlike the Saturn in the fourth house. Thank you.
I particularly like that explanation, Dr. Dharmesh, because Saturn in the fourth house can be considered a very difficult position, and you presented beautifully the positive side of that position. So that always makes me very happy for our viewers that have that position to know what the positive side of it is too. Now, first thing I want to mention is the fourth house is the house of the heart. And the emotion that Saturn represents is grief. So people with Saturn in the fourth house, they carry lots of grief in their heart. And you can think of this as a dark cloud which follow you around, and it's raining. And these people with Saturn in the fourth house, they struggle with depression. They struggle with sadness. It usually takes them a long period to get over losing a loved one. It is a very strong position, and that's because part of the evolution in the individual, this is a moksha house, is their ability to grieve properly and let go of everything that happened. Secondly, the fourth house is indication for mother. So if Saturn is in fourth house, it can indicate difficulties with the mother, especially if moon is aspecting. Because if Saturn moon aspect on fourth house, or even just Saturn aspect, mother can suffer with depression. And then if Saturn moon aspect on the fourth house, mama's a little crazy. Mama's a little mentally unbalanced, potentially. So you have to understand that, especially if it's in a difficult, afflicted position, Saturn in the fourth house, as Dr. Dharmesh mentioned, it does eventually give greater pleasures than you could ever imagine, and a lot of steady growth in the career by the 10th house aspect. Also, identity, maturity growth by first house aspect. But it does indicate grief. It does indicate challenging relationship with mother. And also fourth house is house of home and vehicles. So when we look at, first of all, home, before we look at the physical property of our home, we look at the homeland, which is the land that you're from, which is the land that you were born in and that your ancestors are from, your parents and your grandparents. Where did they live? And oftentimes, people with Saturn in the fourth house, they go away from their homeland. They go away from their place of birth. They go away to not necessarily foreign land. Like a lot of people I see with Saturn in fourth house, they were born on one side of the United States, then they moved to the other side of the United States. They're born in one part of India, they move to another part of the India. So because there's grief associated with the place that you're from. Sometimes it could indicate difficult experiences within the childhood, especially as it relates to the mother. And so sometimes we need to get away from that location. We need to get away from that geography. But still, our karma is there. Our karma is in the fourth house. So even though we might take break from there or not want to live there, we still have to work on our relationship with our mother. We still have to heal the wounds and grief that happened in our childhood and that happened in the place that we are from. So that's the energy of the homeland. Oh, and also I think a fourth house of patriotism, how much you love your homeland. So people with Saturn in the fourth house, depending on the position, can have a very mixed relationship with their homeland. They might not be the typical patriot that you would normally see. There might be some things about their homeland which they like, and there might be some things about their homeland that they really disagree with and that they dislike, and they might desire to have them live in another land because they disagree with the principles of their homeland. And also because the fourth house is the physical home. Saturn is structure, discipline, and organization. So people with Saturn in the fourth house have to keep home organized, have to keep home structured, have to keep home disciplined. And that's all good to keep a clean and neat home. There's nothing wrong with that. But if it's in a difficult position or afflicted, this can become obsessive process. Let me clean everything every time. This little spot, that little spot. This doesn't look in the right square. This doesn't look in the right circle. So our mind becomes obsessive because of our emotions, and all we do is the cleaning of and organizing and taking care of the house. So it's a good position for keeping a neat house. And it's also a bad position potentially if you become obsessed about cleaning the house. But it does show that finding home on a more deeper spiritual level, like the concept of home, we have a saying, home is where the heart is. Well, this is a very difficult lesson for people to learn with Saturn in the fourth house, because the heart has grief, and where they're from or where they're originally born might have difficult memories. So they have to learn to practice this concept of home is where the heart is, which means you can make a home wherever you go. You can make a home wherever you are if you have the right practice there, if you have the right structure there, if you have the right organization there. And so, yeah, those are just some of my thoughts on Saturn in the fourth house. And I'm curious to hear anything you have to say, as well as your insights on Saturn in the Cancer position.
Yeah, that's very true that the Saturn in the fourth house, many people left their birthplace and they relocate to new place, but they always have something missing to their living about this. They always regret that why I left, but still they cannot go back to their motherland. So this is a kind of a remedy also I always give, when Saturn in the fourth house, I say remove all the old things, come out from the past, and leave your birthplace, your family, your pleasure things. And when you remove the roots from there and plant somewhere else, at least by that great sacrification, the Saturn will bless you. So that's a good things you remind me. That's a good thing. Now, talking about the Saturn in the Cancer. See, Cancer is again the moon sign, and Saturn is not so favorable for the Cancer. Again, it's an enemy sign for the Saturn. And here, Saturn is being a very practical aspect planet while placing in the Cancer sign. Cancer is a full of emotion, full of illusion, full of thoughts, belief, all these things, where Saturn is a surety. Saturn is a deeds. So there's a clash between the deeds, the confirmed deeds, as well as the fear, only the emotions. So they are into the conflict of each other. Being the Saturn, the lord of exactly a seventh sign from the Cancer, it will not bear that Cancer sign. Being it's a seventh from its own sign, it is always being a opposite person. And in the physics, we say that opposite attracts, but here it doesn't attract, because a Saturn is a kind of, as we see, is a practical aspect, whereas a Cancer is a sign of emotions. So how your practicality will work with the emotion. So whatever the emotion you put, whatever the moon, we all know the moon have a rising and setting. See, moon complete 12 sign in 30 days, whereas Saturn completes 12 sign in 30 years. That's the biggest difference between days and years. It complete that difference 2.5 day. Moon complete one sign transit, and Saturn will take 2.5 years to complete that one sign. So that is a Cancer sign where the emotion are to being controlled by the practicality, and that control may be which house it is placed accordingly. That emotion are being dry up, that emotion will be and control, and the person are always facing or chasing between the emotions and the practicality. All the aspect of a Jala Tattva, being a watery sign, being a moon sign, this all combination wise, it says that there is some control. Turn out your emotions to the practical. So that is a signal for the Saturn in the Cancer sign. It gives that just control your emotions. Otherwise, your deeds will not be fulfilled. And that is why the judges who always decide the cases, they never influenced by the any emotion. That is why in the court, emotion doesn't work. Only the your whatever the contents in the practical aspect, whatever can be digest, whatever can be recorded in the day to day, that only will only be considered in the court. And we all know that Saturn is a lot of judgment. So during the judgment, he never influenced with the emotions. Even though 100 or 1,000 times the accused pray for his release, the law always go on the law side and punish him. So that's a Saturn in the Cancer sign. Let Kṣaṇāti has to put their inputs on the various aspects of the Cancer Saturn.
Thank you, Dr. Dharmesh. Yes, it is a very interesting combination, especially with the rulership of Moon over Cancer. Saturn and Moon can have a very difficult relationship with each other. But one of the things that I do see is that wherever Saturn, whatever sign Saturn sits in, that it helps us mature. So people who have Saturn in Cancer, before they go through Saturn return, before they go through Saturn Dasha, they can have what you call emotional immaturity. Then after they go through Saturn return and Saturn Dasha, it teaches them emotional responsibility. It teaches them emotional maturity. So before Saturn in return or Saturn Dacha, they have a temper tantrum. They can feel they feel emotionally influenced by everything, and they become very sad and they become very melancholy. But after Saturn return in Saturn Dasha, with Saturn position in Cancer, they become much more stronger emotionally. They're not as affected by other people emotionally. They feel strong within themselves. They know how to process their emotions. They know how to share their emotions. Because I always think of Cancer as this very emotional vibration and Saturn as a great teacher. So when Saturn is in Cancer, is it trying to teach us about our heart? It is trying to teach us to be more mature, be more responsible, be more disciplined with emotions. Hey, we all love, sometimes you need a good cry because it's an emotional release. But does crying accomplish anything? No. Crying does never accomplish anything. It accomplishes the relief of the pressure of the crying, but it just shows that when Saturn is in Cancer, there is more emotional maturity than feeling sad about crying about something, but feeling very strong emotionally and always progressing and always being strong and always moving on. Because I want to bring the remedy into the position of Saturn in Cancer, because I don't think it's a very comfortable position. So I want to bring in the remedy to encourage the emotional maturity and most emotional strength. Here's another thing that's interesting dynamic of Saturn in Cancer. Saturn in Cancer is a caretaker vibration, which means it likes to take care of others. It likes to take care of their family. It likes to take care of the elderly. It likes to take care of the needy. It likes to take care of anyone who needs help. Who's lost in that process? How about taking care of ourselves? So oftentimes with the Saturn in Cancer, we like to take care, and there's nothing wrong with taking care. But Saturn is teaching us, well, you can't take care of anyone else if you cannot take care of yourself first. So I always instruct with remedial for Saturn in Cancer. First, take care of self. Make sure you are balanced. You are in, everything is in alignment with your Dharma. And that is when you can really help people. In other words, we are of no use of helping people if we cannot first help ourselves as well. So Saturn in Cancer position is very strong for that. But Saturn in Cancer people, they very much care about their family. But because Saturn is separation, maybe they don't live with their family. Maybe their family lives in different country. Maybe their family lives in state. As mentioned, there might be missing or longing for the family. So sometimes with Saturn in Cancer position, it is remedial. But the reason you don't live with family is because there's trouble with family. Maybe especially with mother. But it could be other members of family too. So it's this balance of, I want to be close with my family, but I can't live with them. I can't deal with them every day. So I have to balance that experience. So that's just a little bit of my insights of Saturn in Cancer. And really looking forward to looking at Saturn in the past life 5th house position.
Yeah, where both views of Saturn in the Cancer match very well as a control of emotions and be a practical. So that's a good slogan for the Cancer Saturn. Now the deeds into the past life. So there's a combination of a Saturn in the 5th house. And we all know that the 5th house is a house of a storage. Whatever you have extra, you always keep in the storeroom. And 5th house is our storeroom. From past life, whatever the deeds we have balance that we gather in the 5th house. Our stomach, our food also stored in the 5th house. That is what belly is always seen in the 5th house, where your food is accumulated. Your love is accumulated. All the creativity, all the things you wish to do, and your past life deeds. That is a past life deeds as a very heavy weightage word for the Saturn. And being the Saturn seated here, one thing is guaranteed that whatever the deeds, I don't mention whether it's a good deeds or a bad deeds, but whatever the deeds one has done, there'll be a day of a judgment where his deeds will mature and his deeds will come in front of him. If it is a good deeds, he will enjoy, and if it is not so good deeds, he has to pay the things to make it better. So here the Saturn will be very powerful, being an inclination to the higher education. See, we have left some portion of a Saturn in the fourth house that their education also sometime interrupt, and they have to start something new. They might have gone to some line like engineering they have started, but not get an inclination, and then they will turn back and again start in the other way. That's a fourth house Saturn. Now being Saturn in the fifth house, Saturn want the research. Saturn want the crux, the reality. So Saturn in the fifth house, they are always inclined to the higher education, or they do for the research, R&D. All these things happens when the Saturn in the fifth house, and they go deep into the roots and find out the real cause. The fifth house is our past life. So whatever the past life deeds and whatever the deeds they will perform in this life, this all both will be combined in the fifth house. And there will be a time of a judgment day, that is at 36. Nowhere it is surprising, but at the age of 36, I have seen the Saturn in the fifth house, they start receiving all their dues, all their pendings, whatever there in their pipeline, whatever they have worked for it and not been awarded, rewarded, or received, that all things start one after another mature and it will come out. So your own deeds will come out with the deeds that is pending in the past life. Not even the deeds, the person to whom you have some connection in the past life, they may also always come in interaction with you. They serve you, either you serve them, and there's a chances of having a balance of a karmas. Higher education, very good inclination. For love and affection also, they move very slowly. They are not physically attract with the person. It's like just for the some uh, temptation or some kind of a temporary love and affection, but they really want a true love. And because of the search of a true love, it takes a time to understand this kind of a person, but they comprise very deep hearted love and affection for all the people. That children, see, fifth house is also a accumulation of deeds by way of a children. So they may come late, but once they came, the exchange of deeds will be more easier and more faster, because whatever the deeds you are pending with somebody, he has already arrived. So by dharma, this is also a sign of a dharma. It is also give you a direction in the life. What is your deeds? By aspecting a seventh house, it will always give you a guidance that to whom and to how to deal with the opposite. It is directly affecting your 11th house. See, fifth house and 11th house, the common thing is gain. Both the place it is a gain. The fifth house is a unexpected gain, and 11th house is a expected gain. If you invest 100 rupees, suppose in the shares, and if the shares jump into the 500, that means you have an unexpected gain. But if you are putting the 100 rupees in your fixed deposit or recurring deposit, you know you will be earning 2, 3, 4, 5, or 8% interest. That is expected gain. So by sitting in fifth house, aspecting the 11th house, it will control both kind of a gains. It will not make you too much speculative nature. It will also always keep you into the expected gain. It is always give you a good friends, good support from this, and try to fulfill all your desire by getting your own deeds which you have done in the earlier life maturing. By maturing your past life deeds, it will give you a bonus, and it will give you a perk or the benefit or the lab gain, what we call, from the 11th house. And also it is aspecting the second house, so it will also controlling or judging your relation with the family. It's new deeds, how you perform your past deeds, as well as how you deal with your relatives in this life, your relation with the money. So that also being also controlled by this Saturn. So altogether, the Saturn in the fifth house is having a very good control about the deeds, past life deeds, present life deeds, both accumulate simultaneously and both mature and give you result immediately. Immediately, that means after 36, because after 36, when the Saturn mature, it will not hide anything, whatever you have done in this life or the earlier life. And if you are lucky to get the Saturn dosa by that time, then you are flourished with all the good luck. Whatever you have done, that will come to mature. So that's all about the comprehensive result of a Saturn being in the fifth house, very comfortable house. We'll discuss the Leo Saturn after the inputs of Kṣaṇāti. So you may proceed for the Saturn in the fifth house.
Thank you, Dr. Dharmesh Ji. You pretty much covered everything, so I'll just add a few other things on top and explain it in a different way. Is that one of the things that I've noticed that's very interesting about the fifth house is the fifth house is a house of sun. It's a house of Leo. And so when you're looking at Saturn and its relationship with Sun, that can sometimes be challenging. Although if Saturn is in a good position in the fifth house, it's extremely beneficial. It's extremely rewarding. It's extremely positive. So one of the things that I first want to say that I've noticed in my research is an afflicted Saturn in the fifth house causes lots of challenges. An auspicious or functionally benefic Saturn in the fifth house can offer as much luck as any well-positioned Jupiter. Now, when we look at Saturn in the fifth house position, first we look at the Karaka of children, and this is being a house of children. And so Saturn is this vibration where Shani, the slow mover, and also Mahakala. So a few things I have seen with Saturn in the fifth house. Sometimes with Saturn in the fifth house, until Saturn is strongly activated, person does not want children. Or person may think that they do not want children. That they'd rather focus on something else like their career or their hobbies than to have children. And then Saturn gets activated, transit, dasha, and all of a sudden they think about having children. Also, if Saturn gets activated by transit, they can have a pregnancy. So, or Saturn gets activated by dasha or return, they can have pregnancy. So this is very strong position of Saturn in the fifth house. And Saturn shows where our discipline is. Saturn shows where we're going to be tested and challenged to help us grow. So guess what? Your children are here as little angels from Lord Shiva. And they are here to test you, and they are here to challenge you, and they are here to push you, and they are here to help make you grow. So don't think because you have Saturn in the fifth house, you're going to have an easy, pleasy life with your children. They are going to demand a lot of your time. They are going to demand a lot of your attention. And one more thing as it comes to children and Saturn in the fifth house. Sometimes people really want to have children with Saturn in the fifth house. And they try and they try and they try. Let me have child. Let me have child. But that's connected to their will. That's connected to their desire. If the devas and God and the universe want you to have child, that's when you will have child. Not when you want to, when you are supposed to from a karmic perspective. So that's something that's important to remember in fifth house. Something that Dr. Dharmesh mentioned, which I think is also key point, is that fifth house is how our romantic energy unfolds. We know the seventh house is marriage, but the fifth house can be romantic or sexual energy. And so when you're looking at Saturn in the fifth house, these, as I think, I love the way that you put it, Dr. Dharmesh, they're not focusing on the physical attraction. They are not focusing on the physical beauty. Because what do they really need from a compatibility aspect? They need someone who is dependable. They need someone who is organized. They need someone who, as we say, has their head on their shoulders, which means that their life is in order. They have good relationships in their life, and that they're a stable, secure, and grounded energy in their life. And the thing is with emotions and our romantic attraction to people, and people who have Saturn in the fifth house, it happens very slowly. So the person with Saturn in fifth house might feel a little bit of romantic attraction to someone, but they don't fall in love with someone till the 20th date, till the 40th date, till the 60th date. They are the type of people who the romantic love, it unfolds very slowly as they get to know a person, as they get to trust a person. And it does aspect the 11th house, as was mentioned, which is the house of friends. So what's most important before you move on to romance is that they're a good friend, is that they're a trustworthy friend, is that they're a responsible friend. And I always think there's no greater foundation for a good relationship romantically than a good friendship first. So, because then you are allies for each other. And what better person to be your partner than your ally? So let the romantic energy unfold slowly. And then also, as Dr. Dharmesh mentioned, I want to echo, is this is a house of education. It's also a house of spirituality and spiritual techniques, certain rituals and practices, which might have to do with certain spiritual traditions. And when Saturn is in, it can have to do with chanting, like speaking a native language. So if you're Hindu, chanting in Sanskrit. If you're a Hebrew, chanting in Hebrew. If you're Islam, chanting in Arabic. So chanting in the native tongue is very showing up in the fifth house. So or praying in the native tongue is important in the fifth house, or praying in a different language can show up in the fifth house. But guess what? The only way to do that is to know the language, is to learn the language, is to study the language. The only way to perform any spiritual technique is to learn the technique, is to study the technique, is to know the technique. For example, I studied pranayama for 2 years with Dr. Lad, and I still don't know if I know how to do it properly. I try my best, but I did study it for a couple years with him and learned from a good teacher. So there is this vibration of education, and when Saturn is in the fifth house, they are slow learners. But it is the elephant. Do you know that the elephant has the greatest memory? So when someone who has Saturn in the fifth house, when they learn something, they will never forget it. It might take them longer to learn it. Like it might take 6 months, 1 month, 2 years, 5 years, 10 years for them to truly learn something. But once they learn it, it will remain with them throughout their life. When some other types of education in the fifth house, we might learn it, but it is just our short-term memory. But Saturn in the fifth house helps put education into our long-term memory. So I think that's considering that it's a slower learning process, and it's okay to learn slower because in the long run, that information sticks even deeper. So it's a very good position for a student, but just the slow learning student. So I hope my insights on the Saturn fifth house were interesting. And now let's dive into Saturn in Leo, Dr. Dharmesh.
Yeah, certainly. So very matching combination of a Saturn in fifth house. Now looking to the Leo, again it's not comfortable. After the Leo, we'll see that Saturn is comfortable for all the sign. So till that time, as a Cancer. Here, Leo is also one of enemy sign of a Saturn, and being Saturn seated in its own father house is not comfortable because father is somewhat a ruler, and Saturn doesn't like a ruling. He like to give the judgment. He like to perform the deeds without any name fame, without any recognition. He continuously working. So Saturn being seated here, there's always a conflict with the higher authority. There will be always seen that the conflict between him and his soul itself, because Saturn is seated in the sign of a sun, and sun always like to rise, like to shine, like to show up, whereas Saturn doesn't like. Saturn like that to groundwork. Saturn like to work on the very low level. So here that's a conflict between the sun in the Leo sign. While seeing the Saturn in the Aquarius, it's just the opposite sign for the Aquarius, seventh sign. So here also has like a Cancer and a Capricorn Sun Saturn relation. Here also that's a purely enemy sign of this. While keeping this in the mind, that means it happens that the people have done so much hard work, but they are not appreciated. They are not been covered. They are not been open with the public. And whatever the good deeds, whatever the deeds they have performed, whatever the result they have brought, will be shared by others. Not shared, it will be snatched by them, and they pretend that they have done this. So this kind of a discrimination maybe happen with the sun and the Saturn in the sun sign, and being not overruling the result, the ruler of the father, the Saturn keep this continuous pursuance of deeds, and one day the people recognize. I have seen Saturn in the Leo sign, they themselves are not being recognized, but whatever the deeds they have performed, it will be remembered by the generation to generation, because after the death the Saturn will rise, and that will rise in the means of a name. So their name, fame, and recognition will be spread after the death. There are so many people, great people, during their lifetime we always criticize them, and after their death we realize that how valuable they are and what are the important things they have done in our life betterment. So this kind of a person are that they might be dissatisfied, not been rewarded, not been honored, but still they are not behind them, and they are just working hard. And this sun sign, which always to be an egoistic, the Saturn make them light and make it that reality. As I say that the sign is a container, and the planet is always being inside the container to value the container. See, it's not a milk which is having a value, but if you put in the silver glass, if you put in the glass, if you put into the golden glass, its value increase. So likewise, the container value only increase when it change the prospect. So here, the Saturn in the sun sign, it's not willing to shine. It's not allowing the show up. It's not allowing to just being a namesake, but they really work for it. And after their work completed, after they complete their life, it been honored by the generation to generation. So that is my addition to the Leo Saturn. You may share your Leo Saturn in the other aspect. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Dharmesh. Always my feelings align with yours. We'll just explain it in a slightly different way for our viewers. And there is this unique combination of Saturn and Sun. And all through the ancient traditional text of Jyotish, it talks about this difficult relationship between Saturn and Sun. And so Saturn in the Leo sign is generally considered a difficult position. I'm going to talk about the difficult parts, and then I want to talk about some of the positive parts too. But the difficult part is that the Sun is the father and Saturn is the son of the sun. And so part of the reason, as Dr. Dharmesh mentioned, these people are not recognized during their lifetime Why? Is it because their father shines brighter than them? That their father can shine greater than them. And it isn't until their father passes away that they even start to get recognition. And it's often not until they pass away until they reach the climax of the recognition. But it starts with the loss of their father. So oftentimes when Sun and Saturn are combination, the father can outshine the sun at certain times. So that's one karma that is difficult, which shows up. And it also can show what I call an oppression, an oppressed combination. Because the vibration of Leo is that it wants to be independent. It wants to be the one which directs and commands and leads its own life. Leo doesn't want to be told what to do. Leo doesn't want to be told how to do. And Leo doesn't want to be told how to live. But with the Saturn conjunction combination in there are the father and potentially other figures in the lifetime are telling you what you should be doing, how you should be living your life, the type of person you should be. So this shows that there is some struggle. This is also a fifth house of Dharma. So it can show that it's hard to form the identity. It's hard to form the identity. Why? Because other people are constantly trying to influence you, and they might oppress your true nature, and they might oppress your true self. Like, we can think of ourselves as this beautiful bomb of light waiting to explode. But if someone always keeps putting out the fuse with their opinion, with their oppression, then it never gives that light a chance to explode within itself. But usually, for people with Saturn and Leo, when they are complete the Saturn dasha or they complete the Saturn return, maybe that they overcome the oppression. Maybe that they overcome the difficult relationship with their father. Maybe they overcome the difficult relationship with their authority. And as Dr. Dharmesh mentioned, this can allow them to reach high positions in their lifetime, but only through large amounts of discipline and large amounts of hard work. And so this position of Saturn and Leo, it is show up with certain challenges. It does show up with certain adversities. But when we go through the return or dasha of Shani, it gives us a chance to overcome those adversities. It gives us those chance to overcome those challenges. And guess what's waiting on the other side? All the rewards of Leo Rashi. That means our power, our confidence, our believing in ourselves, a healthy sense of character, a healthy sense of identity, and feeling happy and satisfied within our lives. But first, as a remedial perspective, we can't always be heavily influenced by others. We can't always, we have to learn to be strong within ourselves, especially when the Saturn is in Leo conjunction. So that's just a little bit of my insights on that. I hope that was interesting. And I am very looking forward to looking at Shani at the 6th house position with you, Dr. Dharmesh.
Yeah, very good insight about the Saturn, and we are in the same page that being a father sign, the sun is not comfortable. Yeah, moving ahead in the 6th house, that Saturn in the 6th house, again, it will be a battle with the Saturn in the 6th house between good and not so good. Saturn is a partially a significator of a 6th house, being a servant, being a job, being a there's a court, there's a litigation, and all kind of conspiracy. So this is a Saturn own house as a Karaka significator. But here the more challenges it's from the Mars. When Saturn in the 6th house, what happens that you are fighting with your own enemies, which is lies inside you only, and you are chasing all your bad things, you are chasing all your negative force within yourself. And Saturn is always in the mode of a cure, It's a mode of curing the things which has been spoiled, which has been not been used. And we all know that the Mars is a completely opposite planet to the Saturn. Mars is so fast that its speed cannot be counted, and Saturn is so slow, so there's no speed. So that chasing we find in the sixth house, where it's originally that partially both have to simultaneously significant for the sixth house, but the Mars is more comfortable in the sixth house than the Saturn, because Saturn being 6, 8, 12th and 10th house Karaka, it is on the negative shade Karako Bhavanashe. On the theme of a Karaka Bhavanashe, here being a significator of a job, they always feel that they are only performing so much laborious work and other are enjoying. They will think that somebody is always behind them. They are doing some conspiracy. In litigation also, they will always feel that the judges is not favoring his and is not honoring his evidence, and always listening the opposite partner. So kind of a dissatisfaction will always feel, but the rule says the minus minus plus. Being a sixth house is no a negative house. It gives a disease, it gives a death, it gives enemies, it gives a job. So whatever the difficulty, whatever the things is not comfortable for you, being slowed down. Is it not good for us that your disease has been slowed down? If it has come aggressively, you'll face so much intensity. If it is a debt, if the your person to whom you have to pay, if he come and force you, you have to give. But it is slow down. It has made a slow down. Your enemy also will hurt you, will harm you, but not immediately. It will take a long time. When your bad deeds come in front of you, they will come and hit you. Otherwise, it will be very slow moving. So negative house plays with the Saturn, and being slow down, that is something better things for you. Instead of slow down your pleasure, instead of slowing down your good deeds of a fifth house, it is slow down your all the worries, all the problems, disease, enemies. So it is something partially good for you, but being a significant of the sixth house is not comfortable for sixth house related to the job. No job satisfaction, always feel that they are working very hard and not getting a result. For servant also, even though the servants are good, they always feel that the servant is not so competent and is not at par with their wish. So this all kind of a litigation and these things are working simultaneously, but ultimately it will be a somewhat a better and a comfortable house than the fourth and fifth house. The Saturn is somewhat subtle here and not being minus minus plus result. At least it will be a benefit to the native. So that is somewhat my views about the Saturn in the sixth house, and we'll discuss in the Virgo later on. Let you put your views and inputs on the Saturn in the sixth house. Thank you.
Thank you, Dharmesh. I agree completely. And I just would like to reflect on some of those things and just talk a little about them a little bit more. As mentioned, this is a signification point for Saturn in many ways, because Saturn is Shudra servant, and this is the house of service. And so often when people, the higher side of this vibration, which we call in Sanskrit seva, this is our ability to be of service to the divine. This is be in service to the needy. So one of the real positive positions of Saturn in the sixth house, again, and I like it as mentioned, because the sixth house is in kind of Dusthana Upachaya vibration, that you're looking at this influence where Saturn isn't that uncomfortable there. It's not the most, it doesn't mean, it's a mixed effect no matter what. But it's not the most uncomfortable position for Saturn. But by the way, if the Saturn is in Capricorn or Aquarius, it gets much, much better. It gets much, much more auspicious by the aspect of the Viparit Yoga. But regardless of that, we look at this position of Saturn in the sixth house and the higher spiritual side of that being service and a service-oriented nature. and a service-intentioned individual who wants to do seva to others, to the needy, to the divine. Now, this was instructed to me when I studied medical Jyotish, that the sixth house is the first three stages of disease or acute illness. This is Sanchay, Prakop, and Prastar when you're looking at the different stages of disease in Ayurveda. That means that the dosha is aggravated, that the dosha is accumulated. And we know Saturn is Vata. So this shows a vulnerability to the accumulation and the increasing of Vata within the body. But it does not deposit and make formal changes to the tissues until we get to the eighth house. So oftentimes when we look at positions in the sixth house, we're looking at imbalances that an individual struggles with, but not the type of imbalances that are supposed to kill them. So this is Vata influence. And from an emotional, psychological standpoint, Vata is anxiety. So often people with Saturn position in sixth house, they have high levels of anxiety. That means they can be very nervous person. They can be very worried person. They can be very ungrounded and very unsettled person. So of course, from a remedial perspective, you need Vata pacifying diet. You need Vata pacifying lifestyle. And in general, Saturn being there, Vata is Chala. Chala means hyperactive, but Saturn is the slow mover. So what is Saturn in the sixth house trying to teach you? If you don't want to be anxious, if you don't want to be worried, just start taking life a little bit slower. Live life one day at a time. Live life 1 hour at a time. Live life 1 minute at a time. And if you can, and if it's possible, even live life 1 second at a time. And that is good remedy for Saturn in the sixth house. Now, another difficult position which is mentioned is this is a house of work. It's an Bhava house. But sometimes the work that is within the sixth house isn't the work that we wish to be doing, isn't the most fulfilling work, because we look to the 10th house for that. So people with Saturn in the sixth house, they can have a certain job or certain responsibility that they really do not enjoy, that they really do not feel like doing. Maybe they do not like their job, and eventually they will change jobs and find a better, more fulfilling path for themselves. But this is a position of what I call having to pay your dues, which means even though this might not, you have lots of work that you have to do so that you can do what you want to do, so that you can do what makes you happy. You might have to do a lot of things that you don't want to do in the process. And if you think about this from a perspective of the job, maybe you have to have 2 or 3 jobs that help make you good money before you can do the job that is really what you would like to be doing, which is the most fulfilling. And then because of the enemy position of the sixth house, we have to discuss this as well. Saturn at times can keep the enemies distant, and then they will come back into your life. So you might not even realize you have enemies, and then they go, and then they will come back. So it is important to note, because of Saturn being a planet of service, that a lot of remedial energy is, they say, treat your enemy like your best friend. And then they no longer become your enemy. But Saturn in the sixth house is, remember, Lord Shiva is connected to Saturn. So be in service to your enemy. And if you can serve your enemy, they will be less of your enemy. So my remedy, if you feel someone is your enemy, is to, as much as possible, serve them. be of service towards them. And maybe you can teach them a thing or two along the way about life by doing that. But never fight your enemy. Always love and try to friend and try to be in service to whoever you feel might be your enemy. Never fight them. So that's what I want to say about that. And I'm curious, Saturn in Virgo, which is a unique position.
Yeah, very well said about the sixth house, Saturn. Here it's a Virgo sign. That Gemini is a not so favorable sign for the Saturn, but obviously for the Virgo it is a good, because the Virgo sign is differ from the Gemini on the aspect of imagination. The Gemini is a purely imagination, thoughts, belief, whereas a Virgo, which is a Mula Trikona and exalted sign for the Mercury, is a really things where the mind applies and mind works. So where the mind works, mind applies, your deed performs. So here the decision making is fast. Whenever the Saturn in the Virgo, they are a good and quick decision making and immediately do the execution. They are not planning, but once they take the decision at the one shot, they start executing it. So I like the Saturn in the Virgo being a friendly sign, but more comfortable as a Gemini. Here he'll be a more comfortable for the Saturn. So here in the Virgo, it will be a sign for the decision making, for doing the business, for doing the activities. Whatever the mind thoughts comes, they immediately put into the execution, not to wait and plan for it, but immediately they want a result oriented. So that result oriented things also will be seen from the Virgo. It's a quality of being served, because the Kanya or the Virgo sign we see is a sixth house of a Kal Purusha, which means to serve. And if you see the Virgo symbol, it's a serving, it's a catering. It's a catering, one hand a fire and one hand the food grains. So it's a catering, it's a kind of a catering, it's a helpful. So here the Saturn gets a boost with the decision, and Saturn itself is a deeds. So deeds, performance with the good knowledge, with the good application of mind. So why not to accept this combination of Saturn in the Virgo? Because Virgo sign for Saturn is a Uchchagami. Uchchagami means it's just a previous step to the exaltation. For Saturn, the Libra we all know is an exalted sign. So it is a Uchchagami, means just by putting one step ahead, Saturn will be exalted. So it is a preparation of exaltation. We call the Kanya or the Virgo sign as a preparation for exaltation. When your preparation happens, when your thoughts match with your action. So action already Saturn is there, and thoughts already the Virgo gives. So what is a delay? The execution will be immediately. Once you thought, just by clicking it, you'll perform it. Here the Saturn will not delay, because you are formed. Once the person is formed, Saturn has to perform the deeds. Why we are not performing deeds? Why we are facing obstacles? Because we are a little bit confused whether to practice this or whether not to practice this or this or that. That this or that makes your deeds confusing, and you are not getting well result of your deeds. But if you are firm, no, I want to practice astrology, I want to learn astrology, I do this by any means, there's nothing hardship, because you have taken the decision. Now leave it to the call, leave it to the time, leave it to the Saturn. It one day make it in the possible, make it in the surety. So that kind of a guarantee and surety you'll find in the Saturn in the Virgo. Good combination for business, for execution, decision making, and immediately result oriented. So that's a small input I had to put for the Virgo. Rest all you can may add in your side. Thank you.
Dr. Dharmesh, that is hardly a small input. It was very comprehensive and thorough. And one of your particular points, which I really love that you brought out, was this concept of uchagami, which that this is the step before the position of exaltation. This is a very powerful position as we get closer to the exaltation position. And as mentioned, Saturn has a friendly relationship with Mercury. So this is generally can be a very good position for Saturn. Now, I like to think of this combination as pure, as a very pure combination, because we also know Virgo is Kanya, the virgin. And Saturn can be very austere. So when you combine these combinations, there is a lot of purification vibration. And so usually, depending on, the house position and everything, but just in general, these natives with Saturn and Virgo, they are very concerned on purifying. Now, there are benefits to this purification energy, but with Saturn being there, until before their Saturn dasha or before their Saturn return, they can have impurities. We all have impurities, but Saturn Virgo people, before they go through the activation of their Saturn in their life, they have certain impurities. Then through their Saturn dasha and their Saturn return, and even the Sati Sati to some extent, they begin to purify their impurities. And by the end of the Saturn return, and by the end of the Saturn Mahadasha, they can be very pure individuals. They will be service-oriented. They will be very highly intelligent. They will be disciplined. They will be structured. Now, there are some downsides to this combination, just like there are challenges with any combination. And Saturn can be very strict. And Virgo has been known to have a perfectionism vibration. So when you combine the energies of Virgo and Saturn, I feel like one of the main challenges of that vibration is a strict kind of perfectionist vibration, which means they can tend towards being idealistic, which is very good, but idealistic isn't always realistic. But Saturn does help them to be more realistic. Saturn does help them to be more practical, and it's one of my favorite positions for Shani. But there are challenges come with that, where they try to make everything perfect. And the truth is that the world is not perfect. Human beings are not perfect. And you can try your best to achieve whatever you think is perfection in your own life. But from a remedial perspective, no benefit or no good comes from trying to push what you think is perfect onto the rest of the world. So I always tell people when they're strong Virgo vibration, and Saturn is no exception for this, that what you are striving for, what is true for you, might not be true for everyone else. So again, it shows you can strive for this very positive, pure energy in your own life, but that doesn't mean that everyone else has to live their life that way too. So that's the balance of the Kanya Shani conjunction, and I just wanted to mention that. And I've really enjoyed sharing this time with you, Dr. Dharmesh, discussing Saturn through the first 6 houses and the first 6 signs. Thank you so much for your insights.